You felt when the last message went unanswered. It wasn't anger, it was no relief, it was something else. Silence on both sides. No bluff, no play. You simply stopped existing for each other. But something started exactly there. Not in the words that were not spoken, but in the void they created. Because when two people go silent at the same time, the human psyche does something brutal. It starts rewriting who had value and who was begging for attention. The person who has always retreated feels for the first time the weight of his own absence being ignored. And you, who have always filled the empty spaces, discover a forgotten power, that of simply not being available. Carl Jung called this the encounter with the shadow, the moment where each one's ego realizes that it has lost control of the narrative. In the next few minutes, you'll understand the silent reversal that happens when no one gives in. And you will realize why those who understand this game never play the same way again. 1. The emptiness that speaks louder than words. There is a brutal difference between someone who screams and someone who simply disappears. The cry demands a response. The disappearance does not ask for anything. And that is exactly why silence carries a weight that no discussion can reach. When you both stop talking at the same time, there is no more audience. There is no one else who validates anyone's pain. Each one is alone with their own thoughts, and that's where it gets interesting. The human mind was not made for emptiness. It needs to fill spaces. When you're used to receiving messages, calls, attention, and it stops suddenly, your brain goes into alert mode. It's not that you miss the person necessarily, you miss the pattern, predictability, that feeling of being wanted, even if you've never taken it for granted before. Carl Jung said that the human psyche works through opposites, light and shadow, consciousness and unconscious, presence and absence. When someone was always present, absence had no meaning. But when the presence truly disappears, the absence takes shape. It becomes something palpable. You start to notice what's no longer there. And the more you try to ignore it, the more that emptiness screams inside you. The interesting thing is that this happens on both sides. The person who has always run away from contact now realizes that no one is chasing. And that feeling of power, of being desired, of controlling the rhythm of the relationship, simply evaporates. On the other hand, those who have always chased discover that not running is also a choice. And this choice changes everything. Because for the first time, there is no longer a pursuer and a fugitive. There are only two strangers who have decided to stop. Emptiness does not judge. He has no preferences. He simply exposes it. It exposes who you really are when no one is looking. It exposes how much you depended on that dynamic to feel alive, important, necessary. And when that dynamic disappears, you're left face to face with an uncomfortable question. Who am I without this person reacting to me? Most people can't stand this question. They break the silence not because they miss the other, but because they can't stand being alone with themselves. They send a message. They check social networks. They invent some excuse to reopen the channel. But when both are silent, when neither of them gives in, something rare happens. The truth begins to emerge. Not the truth about the relationship, the truth about each one. Jung called this individuation. The process of becoming who you really are, separate from the projections and expectations of others. And mutual silence forces this individuation in a brutal way. You can no longer use the other person as a mirror. It can no longer blame, justify, explain. You can only exist. And existing without an audience is terrifying for those who have always needed external validation. This emptiness speaks. He says things that no conversation would say. It reveals emotional dependencies, hidden fears, unrecognized needs. And the more time passes, the louder he speaks, until one of the two can't take it anymore, or until they both finally get the message. 2. The broken mirror. When no one reflects the other. Relationships work like mirrors. You see yourself through the reaction of the other. When someone replies to your messages, you feel relevant. When someone seeks you out, you feel wanted. When someone fights with you, you feel important enough to deserve the anger. But when no one reflects anything anymore, when the mirror simply breaks, You lose the reference of who you are in that dynamic. This is disturbing because most of our identity is constructed in relation to others. We are children, friends, partners, colleagues. Every role we occupy exists because someone on the other side validates that role. But in mutual silence, all roles disappear. You are no longer the pursuer because no one is running away. You are no longer the distant one because no one is approaching. You just are. And that just being scares. Jung talked about the persona, the social mask we use to interact with the world. Every relationship requires a different persona. But when the relationship goes into total silence, the persona loses function. You no longer need to impress, defend, attack, or seduce. And without the persona, what's left? The shadow. That part of you that was always there but that you avoided looking at. The shadow carries everything you don't want to admit about yourself. The fears, the insecurities, the shameful needs. When there was interaction, you could project these things onto the other person. It was her fault that you felt bad. It was her responsibility to make you happy. But now, with no one to blame, those projections come back to you like a boomerang. And here comes the painful insight. Maybe you never really loved that person. Maybe you only loved the version of yourself that she reflected. Maybe you needed her not for who she was, but for who you became in her presence. And when the mirror breaks, when it stops reflecting anything, you realize that it's empty. Not because she is gone, but because you were never really there. On the other side, the same happens. The person who always kept his distance did this to protect himself, to feel in control. Not to depend emotionally on anyone, but this strategy only works when someone is on the other side insisting. When no one else insists, when no one else reflects its value, protection becomes prison. She is safe, yes, but she is also completely alone. And loneliness hurts differently when you realize that you were the one who chose it. The broken mirror forces a real confrontation, not with the other person, with yourself. It forces you to answer questions you've avoided all your life. Can you exist without validation? Can you feel whole without anyone completing you? Do you really know who you are when no one is watching? Most people run away from these questions. They look for another mirror, another relationship, another person to reflect a comfortable version of themselves. But those who remain silent, those who endure the discomfort of not being reflected, discover something powerful. They don't need any mirror. They may see themselves alone. And when that happens, the game changes completely, because those who do not need to be reflected cannot be manipulated. It cannot be controlled. It cannot be broken by anyone's silence. When you go silent, you don't lose power. You shift it. Learn how to protect your heart and understand his silence. Discover the Jung Method, link pinned in the first comment. 3. The dance of the shadows in silence. Every human interaction is a dance. Someone advances, someone retreats, someone speaks, someone listens, someone chases, someone runs away. This choreography happens so automatically that we don't even realize it. But it exists, and each person has a role that they repeat without question, until mutual silence interrupts the music. And when the music stops, the dance stops too. Or rather, it turns into something completely different. Jung dedicated much of his life to studying what he called the shadow, that part of the psyche that contains everything we reject in ourselves, the emotions that we judge bad, the desires that we consider unacceptable, the weaknesses we hide from the world. The shadow does not disappear just because we ignore it. It is still there, operating behind the scenes, influencing our choices without us realizing it. In the context of a relationship, each person's shadow interacts in complex ways. You project aspects of your own shadow onto the other person. If you're afraid of abandonment, you see signs of abandonment in her every behavior. If you're afraid of intimacy, you interpret every approach as invasion. And she does the same to you. You're both not reacting to reality. They are reacting to their own projections. When the two of you go silent, those projections miss the point. You have no more behaviors from her to interpret. She has no more reactions from you to judge. And for the first time, the shadows are exposed, not for the other, for yourself. You start noticing patterns. He realizes that he always chooses the same type of person. He realizes that he always reacts in the same way. You realize that your fears create exactly what you try to avoid. This realization is uncomfortable because it takes comfort from external guilt. It's easier to believe that the problem is the other person, that if she changed, everything would be fine. But in silence, when there is no more interaction to feed this narrative, the truth comes out. You carry your problems from relationship to relationship, not because it attracts the wrong people, but because you yourself are the common denominator. The dance of the shadows in silence works like this. Each one faces their own ghosts without having the distraction of the other. And this can lead to two paths. The first is escape. The person cannot stand what he sees in himself and looks for something to distract. A new relationship, an addiction, an obsession with work, anything that silences the voice of the shadow. The second path is integration. The person looks at the shadow head-on, recognizes what is there, and begins the work of accepting these rejected aspects. Integrating the shadow does not mean becoming what you fear. It means recognizing that it is part of you, that your fear of abandonment doesn't make you weak, that your need for distance doesn't make you cruel, that your contradictions don't make you fake. You are all of these at the same time. And when you accept that, when you stop fighting yourself, something magical happens. You stop projecting onto others. And when you stop designing, you finally see people as they really are, not as extensions of your fears, not as fillers of their emptiness, but as complex, contradictory, imperfect beings just like you. And that's the moment where real relationships become possible. Not based on fantasy, not based on need, but in mutual recognition of shared humanity. 4. The forgotten power of not reacting. There is a silent power in simply doing nothing. Society teaches you the opposite. You are told to fight for what you want, not to give up, to show that you care. And all of this makes sense in some contexts. But in emotional dynamics, especially complicated ones, constant action turns you into a hostage. You become predictable, controllable, and it completely loses its center of gravity. When you always react, you hand over control of your inner peace to someone else. She knows that if she disappears, you'll go after it. If you provoke, you'll take the bait. If you ignore it, you'll beg for attention. Your reaction becomes the fuel of the dynamic. And as long as you keep reacting, the dynamic never changes. You get stuck in a cycle where every action of yours is a response to something she did. You have lost autonomy without realizing it. Not reacting breaks this cycle in a brutal way. Suddenly, there is no more predictability. There is no longer a guarantee of response. And this creates something that psychologists call cognitive dissonance. The other person expected one behavior and received another. Her brain doesn't know how to process it. It has created an image of who you are based on your past reactions. And now that image doesn't work anymore. You have become an enigma. Jung understood that the psyche seeks balance. When something goes out of the expected pattern, the mind goes into investigation mode. She needs to understand what has changed. It needs to restore order. And that's when the person who has always had power through distancing begins to lose ground. Because her power depended on her reaction. It was up to you to go after it, of you filling in the voids, of you making her absence unbearable for yourself. But when you stop doing that, when you just exist without reacting, the whole structure collapses. It no longer has a way to measure the impact it has on you. There is no longer any way to feel desired through your insistence. There is no longer any way to validate one's own value through its need. And for the first time, she feels something she's never felt before. Insignificance. Not because you attacked her, but because you stopped making it the center of your emotional universe. This is not manipulation. It's not a game. It is simply reclaiming one's own life. It's understanding that you don't need a response to every message you sent. It doesn't need an explanation for every ghosting. It does not need closure for each unresolved breakup. You can just follow, not out of pride, not out of revenge, but because you realize that your peace does not depend on anyone's participation. The power of not reacting also protects you from making emotional decisions. When you're always in reactive mode, you act from the wound, from anger, hurt, fear. And decisions made from these places are rarely good. They bring temporary relief, but lasting repentance. You send that message on impulse. He makes that huge text explaining his feelings. Called drunk at dawn. And the next day he realizes that he has only humbled himself. Not reacting gives you time. Time for the emotion to pass. Time to see the situation clearly. Time to realize that maybe that person doesn't even deserve your anger, let alone your energy. And when you finally act, if you act at all, you act from a place of conscious choice, not of desperate need, and that completely changes the result. Most people never discover this power because they are afraid of silence. He is afraid that silence will mean defeat. That means that the other person has won. But the truth is the opposite. Whoever controls his own reactions controls his own destiny, and those who control their own destiny never lose, even when he loses everything. 5. Two bruised egos, no apparent winner. When two egos come into conflict, they both believe they are right. Both see themselves as victims. Both keep their mental lists of everything the other has done wrong. And as long as there is interaction, there is combat. Each one trying to prove their point. Each one trying to extract from the other the recognition of guilt. But when silence comes, when they both retreat to their corners, there is no longer a battlefield. There is no longer an audience. There are only two bruised egos left with no one to blame at the moment. The ego is a defense mechanism. It exists to protect one's self-image, to maintain the narrative that you are a good person, that your intentions were pure, that you did the best you could. It distorts memories, minimizes your own mistakes, maximizes the mistakes of others. And in complicated relationships, both egos work overtime, creating parallel versions of the same story. One where you are the wronged hero, another where she is the misunderstood heroine. In mutual silence, these narratives begin to crack, because there is no new material left to feed them. There is no more behavior from her for you to interpret negatively. There is no more reaction from you for her to use as proof that you are the problem. The two of you are left alone with your own stories. And stories that are not challenged begin to ring hollow. They are starting to lose strength. Jung said that the ego needs to be confronted by reality in order to mature. When you live in a bubble where only your version matters, you never grow up. You get stuck in an emotional adolescence where the whole world is wrong except you. But when silence forces you to sit with your thoughts, without the validation of friends who take your side, without the fresh anger of a new fight, something different happens. You start to see your own contradictions. You remember things you did that you don't like to admit. He remembers words he said in the heat of the moment and that he can no longer remove. He remembers opportunities that he had to be better and chose not to be. And this memory does not come with pride. It comes with shame, with regret, with that uncomfortable feeling that maybe, just maybe, you weren't totally innocent in this story. On the other side, exactly the same happens. The person who kept his distance, who thought he was superior for not being too emotional, who believed he was in control for never giving himself completely, now faces his own failures. He realizes that coldness is not strength, that avoiding vulnerability is not protecting the heart. It is killing the possibility of real connection. And perhaps for the first time, she feels the weight of the loneliness she herself has built. Two wounded egos without an audience make a bitter discovery. There is no winner. Nobody has won anything. Both have wasted time, energy, possibilities. Both hurt each other and hurt the other. And now, sitting in their respective silences, they both realize that the whole fight was a big waste of time, that the pride that kept them apart was too fragile to bear the weight of loneliness. But this discovery is precious, because it is in it that the possibility of real change resides. You don't change when you're convinced you're right. You change when you realize you were wrong. Not completely wrong, not wrong at all, but wrong enough for the result to be this. And when you accept your share in the destruction, when you stop pointing fingers and look at your own hands, then you grow. No apparent winner, but two people with a chance to beat themselves, to overcome one's own egos, to become more mature, more conscious, more whole versions, and that in the end is worth more than any victory in an argument that should never have happened. 6. The neutral territory where anything can happen. Mutual silence creates something rare, neutral space, a place where neither of them has control, where neither of them is dictating the pace, where no one is attacking or defending. It's uncharted territory for both of them. And in uncharted territories, the old rules no longer work. You don't know how to behave. He doesn't know what to expect. And this uncertainty, although uncomfortable, opens up possibilities that did not exist before. Think of it this way. While there was interaction, the two of you were stuck in fixed roles. One chased, another fled. One charged, another closed. One was emotional, the other was rational. These roles were mutually reinforcing. The more you chased, the more she ran away. The more it closed, the more you charged. It was a closed cycle with no way out. But in the neutral territory of silence, these roles dissolve. There is no more persecutor without persecution. There is no longer a fugitive without someone to escape. And when the roles fall, something interesting happens. The two of you go back to being whole people. No more characters in a toxic dynamic. People with their own desires, with their own fears, with stories that precede this relationship and that will continue after it. And in that person-to-person space, without the papers, real connections become possible for the first time. In neutral territory, anything can happen because nothing is determined. Maybe you realize that you don't want that person in your life anymore. That silence brought a peace that you hadn't felt in a long time. That your life flows better without the constant turmoil. And that realization sets you free. You no longer have to fight over a relationship that hurts you. You can just let go and go. Or maybe the opposite happens. Perhaps, in the distance, you will realize what really matters. Notice that her flaws are not as serious as they seemed in the heat of fights. That his own demands were impossible to fulfill. That what you had good was rare and valuable. And this perception also sets you free. But in a different way. It frees you from pride, of the need to be right, of the stubbornness that prevented you from reaching out. The most important thing about neutral territory is that it doesn't belong to anyone. Neither can force a result. There is no manipulation that works here. There is no such thing as emotional blackmail that has power, because both are too far away to be affected by the old tactics. All that's left is to wait. Wait for time to do its job. Make clarity emerge naturally. Let each one discover for himself what he really wants. And this waiting, this suspension in the unknown, is where the real transformation happens. Not in conversations, not in promises, not in the plans of how things will be different, but in the deep silence where each one meets himself, where everyone makes peace with their own demons, where each one decides whether to carry forward what was or build something new. Neutral territory does not guarantee a happy ending, but it guarantees an honest ending. And honesty at the end of the day is the only foundation on which anything lasting can be built. Lies can create an illusion of connection. Only truth creates real connection. 7. The transformation that only silence allows. Real transformation never happens in noise. She needs silence. It needs solitude. It needs time without interruption. Because transformation is not a superficial change in behavior. It is not to promise that it will be different. It is not willpower applied to old patterns. Transformation is something deeper. It is internal restructuring. That's when your motivations change, when your values change, when the person who looks in the mirror is different. Mutual silence offers this cave, inadvertently, without planning. You go into it thinking it's temporary, thinking that soon there will be resolution. But as time goes by and nothing changes externally, something changes internally. You begin to notice things about yourself that were covered up by the urgency of the dynamic. He begins to notice patterns that repeat themselves. He begins to ask questions that he has never asked. Why do I always choose people who are emotionally unavailable? Why do I always sabotage when things get good? Why do I need external validation so much? Why do I run away from real intimacy? These questions do not have easy answers. They require you to dig deep. May you go back to childhood moments that you would like to forget, that you admit wounds that never healed properly, that you recognize that you carry heavy baggage disguised as personality. This journey is lonely. No one can do it for you. Friends can support, therapists can guide, but the job is yours. And in the context of mutual silence, you have the time and space to do that work. You're not distracted trying to win someone back. He is not wasting energy on emotional games. You are, perhaps for the first time in a long time, completely with yourself. And in this encounter with oneself, things begin to change. You realize that you don't need that person to be happy, that his happiness has never depended on anyone. You realize that many of the things you thought you needed were just attempts to fill voids that no relationship will fill. You realize that the work to do is internal, not external. With this realization comes liberation. You stop putting unbearable emotional weight on relationships. Stop waiting for someone else to complete you. Stop believing that love is suffering. You understand that healthy love is light. It's choice, not necessity. It is complement, not salvation. And when you understand that, you never relate in the same way again. The transformation that silence allows is not about becoming better at winning someone back. It's about becoming whole so you don't have to win anyone back. It's about getting to a place where you're fine alone. And if someone shows up, great. If it doesn't show up, it's also great. Because you're no longer looking outside for what can only be found inside. And when two people go through this transformation separately, when they both do the inner work, when they both become more mature versions of themselves, then a healthy relationship becomes possible. Not based on need, not based on trauma, but in mutual recognition of two whole people who choose to walk together. And if that doesn't happen, if each one goes to different sides, the transformation was still worth it. Because you don't leave the silence the same way you entered. You come out stronger, clearer, more you. 8. Who moves first loses or wins? That's the question everyone asks. Who will give in first? Who will break the silence? And mainly, what does this mean? There is a popular belief that whoever moves first shows weakness. He shows that he couldn't stand it, that he needed more. Who lost the pride game? But this belief is based on a superficial understanding of human dynamics. The truth is much more nuanced. If you move first because you can't stand the anxiety, because you desperately need an answer, because your inner peace depends on outer resolution, then yes, you have moved from a place of weakness. You've delivered that you're still stuck in the old dynamic, that it has not yet done the internal work, that you still need that person to feel good about yourself, and the other person will feel it. You will realize that you have not changed, and the pattern will repeat itself. But there is another way to move first, one that comes from a completely different place. You move because you have completed your inner journey, because he made peace with himself, because he arrived at a place of clarity about what he wants and doesn't want. And from that place you reach out not out of necessity but out of choice. Not because he needs it, but because he chooses it. And that energy is completely different. When you move from a place of wholeness, there is no despair in your approach. There is lightness. There is honesty. There's a clear message of, I'm okay with myself, and if you're okay too, we can talk about where this goes. There is no charge. There is no attempt to manipulate an answer. There is only one genuine opening, and genuine openings are impossible to ignore. On the other hand, if it moves first, what does that mean? It could mean that she also did the inside work, who also arrived at a place of clarity, who also wants to try again from a more mature place. Or it could mean that she couldn't stand her loneliness, who realized that using you as an emotional valve was more comfortable than facing herself. And then it's up to you, who have used silence well, to discern where her movement comes from. The real question is not who moves first. The real question is, are you moving from a place of lack or from a place of abundance? Are you looking for the person to fill a void or to share an already full life? Are you coming back because you don't have anything better, or because you genuinely believe that it can be special? What if both stay silent? If neither of them moves? So maybe that's the answer. Perhaps silence is the end. And finals are also important. Not everything needs to be fixed. Not every relationship deserves a second chance. Some things end so that better things can begin. And having the wisdom to recognize this is growth. The mistake that most people make is to think that there is a right or wrong way to play this game, that there is an infallible strategy, that there is a formula to guarantee the desired result. But relationships are not games. They are complex human connections between imperfect people trying to navigate emotions that don't always make sense. And the more you try to control, the more you lose. The only thing you really control is yourself, their reactions, your choices. It's growth. And if you use silence to work on it, to become a better, more aware, more mature person, then you have already won. Regardless of who moves first, regardless of where it ends, because you won't repeat the same mistakes anymore. You will no longer get into toxic dynamics. You will no longer betray yourself for fear of being alone. And when you get to that place when you're really good alone, something magical happens. You attract different. You no longer attract broken people looking for someone to fix them. You attract whole people looking for real partnership. And relationships between whole people are completely different. They are lightweight. They are honest. They are sustainable. They are what everyone looks for but few find because few do the work necessary to deserve them.